Good morning. Today we're looking at the story of Lazarus, which is yet another long narrative in the Gospel of John. And with this narrative, we hear just a little bit more about God, about who Jesus is for the people that he loves. All the way through John, we started with the Feast of Cana. Then we went a number of stories. There was Nicodemus and being born again. There was this Samaritan woman. I'm the water that never ends. All of these are symbolic messages telling people who Jesus is and who he's meant to be for us. They all have a pattern to them that Jesus says something, it's a little vague, and then people ask him questions. What did you mean by that? And they often ask literal interpretations. Am I going to go into my mother's womb again? Am I going to have water out of this well so I don't have to come back here again? Today's story is about Lazarus and about death and a resurrection. And it's not only an interesting place in our journey to Jerusalem, but this time in history, it's really, really relevant because we've got people dying all over the world from this virus. There's no way to stop it. There's no way to respond to it. It's killing 16-year-olds. It's killing 80-year-olds. There's no difference as far as the virus is concerned. And I'm sure all of these families would really love to have their own Lazarus moments where Jesus comes to them and says, yeah, get up, you're alive again. We'd love that so much. But that's not what's going to happen, and that's not really what the story is telling us this morning either. Jewish tradition around death, I'll go back to that for just a second. Jewish tradition around death says that the soul is with the body for 3 days after death. Burial happens right away. There's a keeper who takes care of the body and comforts the soul in those 3 days as people prepare the body and lay it to rest in a tomb. Now, back in those days, the burial would happen twice. First time, the body was put in the tomb, decomposed. About a year later, people would go back in, collect all the bones, and put them in an ossuary, and then put that in the tomb, and that was their final burial. So the fact that Jesus stayed away for 4 days is very symbolic because Jesus knew, going back to Bethany to see Lazarus and his family, he'd already be dead. There was no coming back from it. There wasn't a miracle here that could happen instantly. There was also no way for anybody else to say, oh, well, he just awoke naturally because it was in the 3-day period and that's when these things happen, so Jesus didn't have any particular power. So he took that argument away. But before he gets there, he spends time with his followers, and they've already been chased out of Judea. Jesus has been threatened with being stoned just the chapter before this. So his life is now literally at risk for wherever he goes. And his disciples do what they do. They're human beings. And they say, well, do you really want to go back there? Because, I mean, come on, we're facing death. And Jesus keeps saying that this is something that has to be done. We've got to go back there. I love these people. They matter to me. Finally, Thomas, who gets a really bad rap a lot of times from the gospel, is the one who says, you know what? Yeah, we're going to end anyway, so might as well go back to die. So they all head back to Bethany, which is just 2 clicks away from Jerusalem. And when they get there, the first thing that happens is that Martha confronts him. How many of us have been in the face of death, have been with our loved ones, have been watching them suffer and die, and the first thing we want to do is rail at God and say, what? Why did you let this happen? Why are they having to suffer? Why didn't you do something when I asked you to do it? It's a natural human thing that we want to do. And we want to believe that Jesus is going to show up, and that we're the special ones, that something is going to happen, because the miracles happen in the Bible. We read about them, we hear about them, we want to be part of them. And it is absolutely devastating when they don't happen for us. So the first thing we do is blame God. Why not me? Why was I not special? I remember years ago, not long after my mother died, this priest's wife said to me, and I've told you this story before, some of you, a priest's wife said to me, if my mother had had more faith, she would have lived. Now, I can't even imagine if that had been said to someone who didn't have my background in theology and faith. I mean, I took this woman to town. I don't know if she's ever said this to anybody else since, but I certainly was not going to stick around to find out. The conception that our faith is in direct proportion to the miracles that Jesus does in our life is wrong. It is erroneous. It is destructive. And anybody who professes Christianity and says that your faith will bring all these miracles on, and if you didn't have faith, that's why you missed out, they're lying to you. That is not how this works. Jesus showed up in Bethany after the time when the Spirit would have left, according to Jewish tradition. He was not there present, but he was there when the time came for the final acceptance. Day 4 would have been it. All hope for the resurrection of their loved one would have been gone by this point in time. And he finally shows up. The thing is that Jesus was kind of there anyway, because he knew when he was talking to his disciples that Lazarus had died. He knew it had been a thing. The stories in John are fantabulous stories, but they have to be read in symbolic, metaphor, beyond the literal. If we stick at the literal, we miss the point. Jesus showed up 4 days later, and there was an audience around him. In proper Hebrew tradition, the entire community was sitting with Mary and Martha, helping them grieve over the loss of their brother. And he showed up when mourning had shifted into another phase. He then told them, perhaps one of the most famous lines in the Bible, quoted regularly at funerals, I am the resurrection. I am the life. So the thing here is, Jesus was not talking about physical death. Lazarus, even being raised, was going to die again. Jairus' daughter, when she was raised, going to die again. Mary, Martha, going to die again. You, me, everybody we know, going to die, physically die. But the concept of the time held that death was a separation from God. And see, here is what Jesus is talking about. The end of your life is not the end of your relationship with God. There is something more. There is hope. There is a new way to be. There's a new way to live. And you can make that choice to live today. You don't have to wait till you're dead and buried. You can make that choice today. And Mary and Martha both asked questions of, why didn't you come in time? From Martha, she can continue to talk about literally, my brother would have been alive. I know the resurrection is going to happen because Hebrews at that time in history believed in resurrection at the end of time. So she believed completely that was going to happen. But Jesus had let her down. He didn't give her what she wanted. Mary, on the other hand, all she did was cry, and she was emotional. And she said, Lord, why not? And Jesus helped her up and said, go open the tomb. And she didn't understand why, but she went and did. And see, this is one of the things that as Christians is really, really hard. We want to understand why things happen. We want excuses. We want to be able to blame things. We want to be able to think we can outsmart whatever's coming at our way. If you're on social media at all right now, there's a plethora of suggestions about how to have this herb, do that drink, have this whatever gadget, and it will help prevent the coronavirus. None of it works. We as a species cannot outthink death. We can prevent it. We've got brilliant people working on ways to elong our life, and so hopefully the death rates will soon start to fall, because they haven't yet, and it's very sad. But we as a species are going to all experience, personally, individually, death. Jesus is there for us at our death. whether it's our physical death, our death to a way we used to live, a death to a relationship, death to anything else. Jesus is there and is the way through to a new way of being. If you trust in Jesus, you will see a new life. Jesus is the resurrection, not necessarily the death prevention, but he's the resurrection. He's the doorway to understanding something new. And his entire ministry, his entire life of service is how we lead up to that resurrection. We're not asked to be passive participants in this. We're asked to be full participants in it and share that message that Jesus loves. And Jesus loves deeply, so deeply that at the tomb of Lazarus, he wept. Didn't just tear up, he wept. The sadness of humanity. But it's also the sadness that he was facing going forward to Jerusalem. Next week, we're going to be into Palm Sunday. Holy Week is right before us. This is a time of great sadness and mourning in our Christian lives. And the story of Lazarus helps us prepare for that. Because Jesus will be the one who will be going to death. And Jesus will be the one who for 3 days is left dead. And everybody thinks it's done. And Jesus is the one who will rise again and show a new way of living. We're not there yet. We have to go through Holy Week yet to feel Good Friday before we can feel Easter Sunday. But the story of Lazarus prepares us. Jesus called Lazarus, come out. He's calling us too, come out of whatever that tomb is. Even if we're sequestered in our homes, we're not going anywhere, we're not seeing anybody, we're not doing anything, we can come out of that metaphorical tomb and take this time to really look at the relationship we want to have with the divine, however we name it, however we understand it, however we feel it. This is a really great time to just spend quietly looking for who we can be when we're finally freed from our physical isolation. Maybe our spiritual isolation won't be as pronounced, and we can find peace and comfort in knowing that Jesus, this entire time, has been calling us to come out and stay with him.